All right. Welcome back, folks, for another episode of the Unplanned Show. My name's Dormain. With me today, Aaron Perrott from KTSL. Please say hello, Aaron.
Hello, everybody.
Wonderful. And just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. We've got a couple, next week, we will be taking a little bit of a break and not have any live streams. And then we will be back for sure on April 29th, talking about platform engineering with Paula Kennedy. And still a little TBD on April 22nd, so stay tuned and look out for that to be scheduled. Also, just to give folks a heads up, we have PagerDuty on tour coming to a city near you, starting with New York on May 22nd, San Francisco on June 11th, and then actually out to London, which is where I met Aaron. That'll be on June 27th, and then look out for Tokyo and Sydney coming after that. So just put that on your calendar. You can find registrations, links and whatnot at pagerduty.com/on tour. All right, so let me pull that down and let's get into today. So as I mentioned, I met Aaron about a month ago when I was out in London. And Aaron came in to talk to the PagerDuty team a little bit about some of what his organization's been seeing in customers around their modernizing their ITSM, their IT service management infrastructure, which, this is one of those things that we didn't have ITSM. It's like the world would be in complete chaos. And yet, if you stop, okay, so we've set up the queues. I think of it as kind of a basic way to kind of organize the work. But if you just stop there, then you're leaving still more optimization on the table. But there's always a million things to do. So I wanted to kind of start with understanding from you, Aaron, what are you seeing happening right now that's driving organizations to be looking at how do they modernize and further optimize their ITSM systems? What's kind of going on beyond that?
I think at the moment, automation is a massive thing in the ITSM world. So historically, things would come in, they'd go to a queue, people would work on them. And that's shifted a lot. So now most of the time that something comes in through your ITSM system, whether that's a request or an incident, you'd expect a level of automation to be some type of triage. So whether maybe that's running a low-level automation job to try to get some more data from the logs or try to understand something more from the user, there'll be something running that's giving either a agent more information before they have to solve the problem, or hopefully fixing the problem or provisioning the request before it needs to go to anybody. So what you're trying to do there is drive a much better user experience. And I think automation is a big thing. I think the second thing, obviously, AI is a little bit of a buzzword at the moment, but it's been in ITSM land for the last 10 years, certainly in a lot of the industries that I've worked in. So I think where it's started to shift the dial now is you can do more with it. So what you're actually being able to do is to give like context sensitive knowledge back to the user, which is a real big win, or start to correlate maybe system events that are coming in with what the end users are seeing. And again, that shifts the dial in being able to provide a better level of service and ultimately a better user experience. So those two things are making quite a sizable difference. I think the third thing, which is maybe less of a technology change, but maybe more of a process change, is that historically we always worked it's almost like a tiered system. So you had the desk and then you had tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You progressively got more technical as you worked down those tiers. But with the advent of a more agile working method, probably born out of DevOps, but as more companies move to sort of a tribe squad style way of working, what you're tending to find now is that structure has flattened out a little bit. So what you're looking for when a request or a ticket comes in is somebody who has the right skill to perform that task. That doesn't necessarily have to be pigeonholed within a team. And that's really allowed more people to probably get involved in service management, but also it's sort of given a broader spread across the business. So it's led to more collaboration, because it may well be that you have to sit in the Windows Server team to be able to understand some basics about Windows servers. Okay, so A lot of times I might be a developer. I understand how to fix a certain amount of things on that. Maybe I'm in between my sprint. I can see a ticket come in. I've got the requisite skill. Why can't I just pick it up? So it's giving organizations a much better opportunity to leverage all of the IT skill they've got across their workforce. And that not just on the infrastructure side, but also within the business. So we've always had shadow IT. So people going in and getting their own application, not necessarily following the corporate standard, just to work around a problem. Sometimes that's because there's a perception that IT is slow or cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
But by bringing this level of collaboration, you're actually empowering those business users, because you're saying, no, actually, if you have the skill to help, fine, you can engage, collaborate. We'll work with you on the requests and the incidents. So what you're doing is you're bringing that shadow IT almost into your ITSM ecosystem without forcing it upon them, but just allowing that collaboration to happen. So I've seen that as a big change, particularly actually driven through the pandemic, because it forced a greater level of collaboration, because people were all of a sudden didn't necessarily have access to a distinct IT team. So in some cases, you had to solve problems in a different way. And I think it's accelerated that conversion to have a greater collaboration across everybody within the business. So I think from a non-technical side, I see that as quite a big change in IT service management over the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, and it's interesting because you can almost see how all three of those are connected, between being able to leverage more different types of resources across your organization to find a solution and resolve something, having more automation that can also help take some of those routine things. So again, you're getting more leverage, and then AI, maybe building kind of on top of that in a way that it just adds another layer of how can we get the work done in
Yep.
different ways, right? So what I'm hearing you describe is that, if in Gen 1, if you will, of ITSM, right, it was about setting up the queues and, making sure they're working properly, and they sort of, but they're very linear. And now it's kind of about like, how can we revisit like what's getting into the queue and how it's getting into the queue and how it's working its way through the queue, potentially being able to pull things off and resolve them faster or through a different set of resources than literally just everything waiting for its turn in line. Is
Yeah.
that
That's exactly the case. And I think it's still driven by good fundamentals. So, for example, as much as you may have automation in play or a level of AI to do that correlation, you still have to understand how that service is delivered to the end user, and therefore how that service is supported. So in many cases, whilst there's technology enablers and some changes in the process that's enabled ITSM to be more fluid, it's still built out from a good base. Because if I'm a user and I'm interacting with IT, whether I am an end customer or whether I am somebody internal to the business itself, I still have a set of things I have to do, right? So whether I'm an end user and I'm engaging with my banking application, or I'm purchasing a ticket, or whether I'm an internal IT user and I want to get access to a file within our SharePoint site, regardless of what my journey is, I still have to engage with IT to have that solved. And each one of those points will have a different service that underpins it. So regardless of what my problem is or my concern or what I'm trying to do, you still need to know, what automation are you calling? What type of correlation is relevant in order to solve the problem or fix the issue that that person is experiencing? So that's still vitally important. So take the example of the banking application. If that's running slow, so my end users are getting a poor user experience, now that could be a whole raft of different issues. There could be a networking problem, could be an application issue, could have been related to a change that happened on the weekend, could just be due to load. Maybe it's the run up to Christmas and we're just really busy. But each of those areas are going to have a different pinch point. Now, if I understand what underpins that application, I understand all the different points within it, then it allows me then to leverage my AI to pull all of those logs together, pull all that patterns that I'm seeing, both from that event data, but also from what my end users are seeing, pull those two things together, and hopefully then I can pinpoint the problem, because that's what you're trying to do. Like historically, that type of example, you would have ended up probably getting somebody from the network team, and they would have said, oh, it's nothing to do with the network, and you go and contact infrastructure, and they would say, you talk to the developers, and it would have bounced around, and then maybe you got a bridge because it was a major incident, so everyone gets on a bridge, and now we try to triage it. Whilst that still happens, but what you want to try to do now is to say, before we get to that point, I would expect today for a level of automation to have run, a level of AI to collect in my logs, and hopefully to start narrowing it down. So you may have seen, do you know what? Our infrastructure looks great. Got no CPU load. It looks like it's performant. Doesn't look like an infrastructure issue. And our network looks good. We're pinging our routers. We can run our synthetic transactions to test that our network load is good. However, I did see we did a change 2 days ago. And actually, I could see that since that, we've had a couple of these issues reported. What was in that last change? Okay, let's pull up our DevOps feed. Let's look at what happened. Okay, looks like it could be that. Let's narrow down what we did there. Let's roll back to the version we had on Friday. Does that fix it? It's that type of the ability to sort of take all of those different data points and expose them without the requirement to have so many people on the call. Because as a decision maker, and particularly when it happens out of hours, okay, so during the day, in a working day, everyone's in work, okay, it's easier to get hold of people, fire up a Teams chat, start talking, you can get that engagement. But these things tend to happen at 3 a.m. So someone gets paged, they're on the ops bridge, they don't necessarily know how to resolve that issue quickly. So then they're paging 5 or 6 people. But if we can engage or empower that operations person to say, do you know what? We've done the triage. We think it's related to this. You just need to get hold of the developer, and then you need to potentially roll that change back. It just speeds up the whole triage process, and that brings down your service levels and gives you a better user experience. And ultimately, that's what we want to do, right? We want to give a better experience for our customers, and all of those things sort of link together to do that. That was a long answer. Sorry, Dormain.
No, it's quite all right. I want to you've kind of painted this picture of like, hey, there's still going to be times when we open up the bridge and there's going to be on it, but there should probably be fewer people on it. And the conversation should be starting from a different place with a lot more data that's been exposed. I want to kind of go back a little bit, because that's if that's sort of the, hey, this is where you should be able to get to. People don't get there on day one. So what's the sort of crawl, walk, run? And I've just learned that you're a runner, and so should be an apt analogy. If folks are kind of, as you mentioned, AI is really buzzwordy right now, a lot of interest in it. But from what you described when we met like a month or so ago, trying to jump straight to that is probably not going to work very well. So what do you see in your practice, in your experience of how do people move along that journey? What sort of needs to you mentioned like they need the strong foundation. Like what does that need to look like for them to take the next step, and then the next step, and then kind of get to the point where they're making use of AI and automation and able to kind of flexibly use the different teams that they have in their organization?
I think the key to start with is actually not to go too wide. So in a lot of organizations, customers will talk about CMDB, and they'll talk about having to understand how everything is pieced together, and that the totality of their infrastructure and the services they provide. But in essence, for most businesses, you could probably boil down what makes the business run to maybe 20 or 30 critical business services, because there's a lot of things that sit on the periphery, and they're important, but they're not critical. So the first approach I would always say is, let's look at what's critical to your business. So there might be payroll. There might be that you provide an end user facing application. It might be that you are a bank and your core is your transactional volume. whatever you do as a business, you will have those core systems. So I always recommend, let's start with those. Let's model those. Let's understand what they do. Let's understand the people that use them. Let's understand what business processes they underpin and how they're supported. And typically, if you're constraining that list to 20 or 30, it's much easier to get to a good point where you understand the impact of them and you understand how they're pieced together. So when you're building up that model of that impact, you can understand it to a great level of detail for those 20 or 30. The rest will come, because once you put a process in place to start discovering what you've got and looking at how it's impacted, you can sort of rinse and repeat the process again and again and again. But let's start with the things that actually impact the business. Because when you go up to the levels within an organization and you get to the top, the CFO cares about the things that impact the business. The periphery, fine, I understand it. Maybe for audit and compliance is important, but it's not what's driving the business or pushing us forward. So let's model those core services. Let's understand what they are and how they work. And then to leverage AI and automation, the next thing to do is to look at, okay, what types of volume are we getting against those core services? So what are people asking for? What types of requests are we seeing? What types of incident are we getting? Are we getting repeat incidents that therefore should be problems? Are we managing change well? So all those typical ITSM processes, let's ignore the process a little bit for now. Let's just focus on what's impacting our service. Let's go back to the basics of that. And then where we're getting consistency and where we're getting repetition, then that's a good starting point for automation, because happening again and again, right? So therefore, there must be something we can either fix. So therefore, you want to look at using AI to start to collate the data points you have, or there's something that's going on again and again and again. So let's automate it. So going back to the volume or the load example, if we're getting a spike in our application use around a particular holiday period, then we know we need to spin up more capability around that time. So we should just be automating that. It shouldn't rely on somebody manually creating that additional load. So that's a good example of a piece of automation. Or, much more recently, the rise of sort of DEX tools on end user devices is much more prevalent now. So understanding that the end user is getting something that's slowing them up between, their laptop and the browser, and that could be an application issue, could be a local network issue. But that type of data point probably wasn't available 5-6 years ago, not as readily as it is now. But again, that's another feed. That's another input to say, well, we might have something going on here. And we've noticed it's only when they click on the cart. So you say, right, looks like we've got something that's going on with our cart. Let's go and look at that code. Is it performing badly? Is it not working as well as we expect? So we're feeding that data point in. But by narrowing it down to our critical business applications and making sure we understand how to scale that out, we can then apply it across the business. But what we're doing is getting much more bang for our buck initially, because we're solving the problems for our critical business services. And then what we're doing is just replicating that process. But we're already seeing a return on investment. Quite often with ITSM projects, there's always this thing, we're spending more money on ITSM, right? So the tools can be expensive. The processes can be laborious. And quite often we're going into organizations and they're trying to justify a business case. But actually, it's because the business case is so wide. It's like, we want to understand our CMDB and we want to do 100 service models. It's like, well, why? Let's just do 30. You won't make a business case that's narrower, but then once you show some benefit to that, so once you start to get some automation, you reduce your volume that's coming into the desk, you get higher user satisfaction ratings, then that justifies the business case to move forward. So you're starting to feed back into that process. So it's much more important just to start, just be really sharp about what you're doing, really pinpoint it. It's so easy to get distracted by a lot of the noise that goes around ITSM, and you can focus on all of the processes that come in, but sometimes it's better to be narrow and then get something right and then move on and then move on, and slowly it will come together. And you'll have so many skills within most businesses now to do this. You can actually move quite quickly. You just move narrowly and get the right people with the right skills to start looking at it. And that's when you might also look at maybe deploying technology. But what you'll be doing at that point is deploying the technology you need as opposed to getting another event management tool in your stack. No offense, like PagerDuty and all the managers, but you need to make sure you're getting a technology that suits that gap. And sometimes you'll have something, right? But what you might not be doing is managing it very well. So, lots of organizations might have 18 event management tools, but you want to consolidate that. You want to bring all of that together. You want to understand all of the data that's being collected and then just use that to move forward. And different organizations will be a different level of maturity, or they'll be at a different point within that journey. But it's about trying to sort of narrow that down and focus on what's right at that time.
Okay. And you're bringing up something in around sort of when you brought up like kind of the event management side of things. And this also reminds me of something else that you mentioned, really around kind of making that shift from how things get identified, whether they're kind of coming in through more request systems, and other types of, it's not really plugged in directly to the event stream, if you will.
Yep.
Making that jump. Just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, what's the kind of must be this tall to ride the ride type of foundation you would expect someone to want to have in place in order for them to then start to take that next step and have this whole operational model flow directly off of an event stream.
I think for that, it's important to make sure you're getting as much of the data as you can into one place. Now, whether that's through sort of single pane of glass style applications, or whether that's a manager of managers, you need to make sure that you're seeing all of those data points or those data feeds in a central area where people can get at it. So whether you're back to that operations person at 3 a.m. who wants to understand who they're supposed to contact, versus you're on a major incident management bridge and you've got 7 or 8 people on there and you want to see the data, it's important that you can see it all in one place. So in many organizations, you'll have something that's monitoring security, something that's probably monitoring your external network traffic, something that's going to be monitoring your infrastructure. That may be different depending on whether you're in multi-cloud or single cloud. You may well have a monitor for each of your cloud providers, but there'll be numerous data points that are going to come in. Now, you want to pull them into a central place so you can see all of that data flow in one area. Now, historically, we would have done that using correlation and basically clever SQL, want of a better term, to bring those events into one place and filter out the noise. These days, that will be done predominantly using AI. AI is very good at doing correlation, has been for a number of years. If you forget about all of the sort of the generative AI, this is much more basic than that. It's just maths. It's just looking at events. Are they the same? Yes, great. Very straightforward. So it's not a complex use case, but it's a perfect use case because repetition is the thing that AI is still best at, right? And the thing that humans don't like doing. So it's the perfect use case for it. And sometimes what I've also been seeing, though, is there's always tends to be a focus on the operations side. So when people talk about event, they tend to think about operations. And actually, you have to bring in the user data as well. It's such a rich source that you can't get from a monitoring application. It's not going to tell you how somebody's experiencing that service. So quite a lot of the time when we talk to customers, it's almost like, don't forget about the ITSM data. Like, don't assume that we've got this great event management framework and we're feeding everything in and we're using our AI to do a correlation and it's picking out our services and it's telling the right people. That's great. But our end users are seeing something completely different. Or actually, our events aren't picking it up, but there's an application issue because it could be usability. And usability can't be discerned typically for a monitor. It's quite hard. So you'll get a different lens on what's happening. And that might spawn a different set of problems or a different set of challenges. But all it is another data source, right? So it's not end user ticket data is anything clever or special. It's just unstructured. So the ability to sort of pull it back into that lens is harder because you can't guarantee how somebody's going to describe something, or if they're even going to describe it at all. Quite often we see users are in an application and say, "Oh, my Chrome's slow." It's like, what? And then you dig down and they're actually using an application that's browser hosted. They don't mean Chrome at all. They mean the application. So it's, you have a different lens on that world because you've got a completely different level of understanding. But you bring that together, and then you bring your event sources together, and then you bring that single pane of glass, and then you can be much more targeted. And the other thing is just simple things like, even if it just improves your communication. We with a customer recently, and it was a similar sort of issue around that, where they were seeing loads of issues with browser connectivity, and IT were sort of checking around all of that. And we just started looking at we ran an AI over some of the user data. It was like, are you sure this is actually a browser problem? Because I don't think it is. And it turned out it was to do with the Intune. They were just pushing out browser updates. But what the end users were seeing was an Intune pop up on the browser to say, do you want to upgrade the new version? And they were just minimizing, and then it would just pop up again, and they were minimizing it. But it was taking load off the laptop. Now, that was being described as a browser issue, because why wouldn't you describe that as a browser issue? If you're an end user, you don't know what Intune's doing necessarily. You don't know that it's automatic software provisioning, which is what IT were looking for. So it's just a simple example where all of a sudden you correlated that feedback. Okay, we're doing Intune pushes. That's the pop-up. So it's just, it just gives a different lens. And sometimes in IT, we can become a little bit myopic to our event stream, and we forget about the very people we're trying to help. So it's about getting that additional lens as well. But bringing it all together is so important. If I could go on a bridge and see all my data points and my understanding, I can make much better decisions much more quickly, and that allows me to ultimately solve the problem. So I went off a slight tangent there, but
well, I mean, but you bring up a great point about having to enrich what you're looking at beyond just event data to include end users, and not just your internal end users, but also if you're talking about a customer facing application, then what's the signal you're getting out of your customer service and support organization, as customers are reporting that and calling in for whatever they're trying to do. That's something that we certainly see. It's like I probably, folks are getting sick of hearing me say it, but in every organization, it's a non-zero number. You might be better at it than others, but it's not zero. And so far, I've never run into anyone who can disagree with that. That's definitely like me sitting there with the coffee cup in like Washington Square Park with the signs like "Fight me on this." I dare you. So, okay. All right. Like getting everything into one place. And then, just what else in terms of that maturity, like where do things go from here? What are you really excited about in terms of, almost like what are you kind of seeing that seems pretty cutting edge that maybe hasn't been picked up in a lot of places, but that you're thinking this is going to be a critical way forward for organizations?
I think moving to almost like a more lightweight IT service management is where companies are going, and I think that's going to be a big sea change in the ITSM industry over the next 3 or 4 years. With the advent of the sort of the technology that's coming through now, you don't necessarily need a 35-step change management process, okay? Because you should have a good understanding of what's happening within your applications. And actually what you want to do is open the door a little bit up to everything that's happening within your dev world, so you can understand the impact that it might have when it hits production. Historically, we have always segregated that off. DevOps has played in its own space. And they don't necessarily buy into the formal change management processes. Oh, well, we're not in QA yet. You don't need to know about it. You can wait until later. I want all those boundaries to go away. If we could encourage DevOps to say, look, I'm not going to make you go through a 35-step change process, but I want your data, right? So when you're doing something, just tell me about it. It's fine. I'm not going to start to stop you doing it, because it's DevOps. We want to be agile. That's what we're doing. We're moving to that sort of that state. That's perfect. But you need to know about it. So you get that additional data so much earlier, because then what you start to see is how that's changing the application before it hits service. Because that's the issue we have now when you bring in DevOps, is things change more rapidly and it's harder to get on top of them, and then user experience starts to fall apart. And the historic way of doing ITSM, yes, we can improve it with all the things I've said, the AI and the automation, and we can get on top of it quicker, but we're still seeing it late. So you have to look at this from a different angle. You can't enforce governance to that level of degree over an area that doesn't want that governance. And actually, we want our business to evolve, because the market competition is so great now. We can't afford to be 6 months behind. So we have to drive that forward, but we can't forget about the controls that go along with it. So why not just get visibility of it earlier? Make ITSM lighter weight. Get that level of detail much earlier on in the process, because then you've got much more opportunity to do something about it. You've got much more opportunity to see the impact it has. And not only that, the quicker you can get to end user feedback, or the quicker you can run a proof of concept, the more opportunity you've got to get it exactly right. You can feed that back into the next sprint. Typically, it's going through dev land for 3-4 months, because they don't want to go near QA land because it's too structured. And then by that point, you're back at sprint 1 if you've completely misread the brief. Is that if we can get rid of that, I think it will have a massive change. And I think some of that's a mindset thing within the world of ITSM. Some of it is a nervousness about embracing that sort of more tribe-based methodology, because it's almost, oh, does ITSM get cut out then? Where's my change manager? Where's my problem manager? I think there's skills that sit within the tribe. I don't think they go away at all. In fact, if anything, I think they become more important, because you're increasing, or you should be increasing, the volume that's coming in, but just controlling it in a different way. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited for that change to happen, because I think what it will do is it will get us to a much more proactive state. Before things go out, we should understand them already. And then the things we know might cause a problem, well, then we can fix those. We can put an automation in. This whole concept of, I don't like the concept of fail fast. I don't like that. But develop quickly. And if you've got an issue, issues are fine, as long as you know how to get around them. There's nothing wrong with known errors, right? Known errors are great, because we know how to cover it off. We know what to do about it, but we haven't stifled development. So if you can still go live in that state, but people know how to fix it, or they know what automation to run, or they know how to get on top of it, it's fine. It gives you competitive advantage. Why wouldn't you do it? So that's the way I think ITSM can really move forward over the next 2 or 3 years. I think we've got such a great opportunity to leverage some of the technology that's available now to do it, but bring DevOps into the ITSM world, make us more one holistic IT team that's driving towards a common goal, rather than what has been seen in the past as sort of them and us. And I want to break those boundaries down. That's what I hope to see. I think some of the large organizations, I think we're way away from that, but we are starting to see that peter through. So we do a lot of work with one of our banking customers, and they're definitely going down that route, and they're a major bank. And for them to start to see, do you know what? Having a tribe structure, having everyone talking together, having ITSM skills within the tribe, having early adoption, so we can see what's happening, is really starting to make a difference for us. We're seeing volumes going down. We're seeing more automation. So once you shift that dial and you start to see it work, then you can get buy-in. But I get it. It's a big sea change. If you're used to sitting in your block and I do this job and that's what I do, it's quite hard to embrace that wider community. But there's massive opportunity there. And sometimes, you can really get people on board with it, because sometimes there's a new piece of technology I could learn, or I've got some opportunity to look at something I've never thought about before. I've never been exposed to that, but now I've got the opportunity to learn it and understand how that part of the business runs. It can also be really exciting for staff members, particularly as it's so hard to hold on to good IT people now, that you have the opportunity to give them more experience, give them a much better idea of what's happening across the business. rather than just in one area, by leveraging that collaboration and by getting everybody involved at a much earlier point within the process. Again, even from maintaining staff, personal growth, but getting better tech skills across your business, it enables so many of the softer skills as well as being able to just reduce incident volume. But it's giving a much better, just a much better place to work, and a lot of people in IT like that. They want to embrace the new technology. They want to understand what's coming through. So it's a huge opportunity. So again, that was a very long animated answer.
I could tell just from the energy of that response. I'm like, okay, I think we got to what Aaron's really excited about here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, and it's like there's part of what you're describing, which almost this is gonna be a weird like technical analogy for like people, but it's almost like that shift from say like you've got to you write the data into a structured database, and then Kafka comes along and it's like, well, no, what if you could just replay it off the stream, right? Like what if you really
Yep.
operate off of an ongoing flow of data as opposed to this kind of schema that gets very locked and is very difficult to change. Very powerful, but very difficult to change. Instead, it's
Yep.
like, well, if you could have all kinds of listeners to an event log, like you could start to create all kinds of, not that it's a perfect solution. There's plenty of challenges in that architectural model, but I'm almost hearing you describe like a people and teams orientation of, instead of orienting around kind of, hey, we have to have a perfect view of the world, everything, like everything that the light touches, to use a Lion King analogy reference. Just go with it, just go with it. Everything that the light touches must be documented in this CMDB. And I really like your sort of suggestion of like, don't try to boil the ocean.
Yep.
Focus on the 20 to 30 critical businesses. But then as you get your holistic view of the events and the user issues and everything, and then start to drive down volume, then it's really about bringing those teams together so they're working off of a common flow.
Yep.
If that.
Yeah, it's true. And I think we've just got the opportunity to be a bit more fluid. So 10 years ago, you had to have that structure in place because there was no real way of responding quick enough. Okay, the technology wasn't quite there really,
Mhm.
um, and working habits weren't there either. So you had to have that structure and that governance, and that's still important because there's compliance and order that you have to adhere to.
Right.
But what you'll find by becoming more fluid and more agile, you're actually getting more data, and you'll find that you'll almost get there by stealth. So you focus on your top X, but you open the door up to everything else. And then as that data flows through, you'll find that things are getting populated. You'll find that actually you have got a much better understanding on a huge amount of your estate because everyone's sort of talking to each other now. So as you move through that fluidity, you're actually still covering everything. It's just almost like you're opening the dam. So previously, we wanted to build the dam and we wanted to fill the other side up and we wanted to make sure that we were doing something with it. Whereas almost what I'm saying is, well, look, put the basic bricks in place and we'll get an understanding of what we're doing, but we'll just let the water flow, right? Because we'll get all of that good information and then we'll understand what it is we need to do with it. We'll understand what it is we need to attack. We'll understand the things we're not quite that good at, and we can then do something about them quickly. But now we have the capability, particularly with the automation AI technologies, to actually understand that or put a lens on it fast enough to let it flow through, because we're not reliant on humans reading the data anymore. We can get it to do the reading for us, and then where we add the value is interpreting that analysis in a way that says, actually, these are now how we make those changes. So the more interesting part of the journey is where you add much more value, because that's where you want your people to be looking at that and saying, okay, we're seeing this continually, right? That's just a better knowledge article because actually people just don't understand it. Or actually that's better infrastructure or that's a better application. But wherever it is, we can group that together, and then you can make better, more instant decisions, and that allows that fluidity to work. And that's what I see. We're just on the cusp of that now. Technology is where we need it to be. People are working in a slightly different way, so that it's a good opportunity to sort of push that door open. And I'm starting to see that more and more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I had a guest on maybe 6 months ago or so that was also talking about particularly ITIL
Yep.
practices, and even just how ITIL 4 has changed some of the wording that also helps open up this door
Yep.
for, it doesn't have to be a team, it just has to be a way, which could be automation. And to your point, like automation, AI are critical to being able to stay on top of a flow, but that's a good thing, right? Like you want that flow as much as possible. And I think you've got a really interesting observation, which is just by being deep in that flow, particularly with your critical systems, instead of trying to like dam it up. I love your dam versus flowing water, and say like, hey, we've got to dam it up and make sure we have everything first before anything passes through. It's like, let it flow, and we'll be able to discern and see a lot more and a lot faster, and be able to keep up with competition and whatnot. Final kind of question, and just sort of, especially since we've got a lot of PagerDuty users who tune into the show, tell us a little bit more about what KTSL is doing with PagerDuty, just so that folks have a little bit of context, and also where they can go to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, so we've been a PagerDuty partner for a few years now. So we take PagerDuty's different applications and integrate them with ITSM as a very brief starting point. We're ITSM experts, so we've been in the business for over 25 years. So I'm nearly 30 years in ITSM, so it's a scarily long time. But yeah, so we work with PagerDuty customers to augment their ITSM data with what they're seeing through PagerDuty, and obviously leverage PagerDuty's automation and AI capabilities to make sure they're getting the most out of it, and the most out of what they're doing within ITSM. Because like I said, the two playing together, that's where you get the most value. So that's where we've been focused on, and that's where we've been trying to help both our customers as well as our PagerDuty customers as well. And we partner with different automation products as well, just to bring the right thing for the customer, because it's always important to have the right product for the right use case. But yeah, that's how we help, and it's been really good. Since we started working with PagerDuty, I've been impressed by the company and what we've been doing. And again, because you come from the DevOps world, you bring that fluidity. And I think now with the maturity that's coming through, they're now getting the sort of the best of both worlds, and that's what's really interesting for me, and that's why I sort of, I'm excited about some of the sort of the companies that have come into the market that are pushing that boundary a little bit more with a slightly different lens. But I think there's an opportunity just across the piece for that to move forward in a little bit more, hopefully more quickly, because I love to, back to the walk analogy, I much prefer running than walking. So I would be much happier if we were getting there faster, but I understand it's a big change. So yeah, we sort of hopefully help bring customers along, and again, just focus on the things that they need to focus on, back rather than focusing on everything, right? Let's just try and focus on the little thing that moves you forward, because that's what's more important, and everything else will slowly slot into place.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. You brought just really great perspective for particularly myself, not being super deep in ITSM, but it's certainly a world that has been part of shaping a foundation for a lot of organizations in terms of how a lot of work gets done, and kind of gets things out of complete chaos. So exciting to hear where you see things going. And thanks everyone for joining and tuning in, and have an uneventful day.
Thank you very much for your time, everybody.